Russell here again. So today I'll show you how to convert a 1000x-4 into a 1000R-4. Okay, so just a couple tips and recommendations I have for you to start off with is if you're going to use the factory R suspension like I did, make sure that you switch over the steering rack as well. So the X steering rack has a sharper turning radius than the R does. And what happens is if you put an R axle with the X steering rack, it's going to bind up your front axles, and you're going to frequently have issues with that. Okay, so there's several options out there if you want to go with a wider suspension. So I went with the factory suspension from the R, which I took off of my two-seater and put onto the four-seater, which worked very, very well. But in the future, I'm going to switch over to the 77-inch suspension from JSport. It's just I couldn't afford that right now. So that's definitely my first choice. That kit also comes with, and it's the kit that I use to make the R work, is the extra bracket that's in the back that the X doesn't have, that you have to have for the R suspension. Okay, so that's 77 inches wide. Another great selection is HCR, has a 72-inch wide suspension, and you don't have to weld any other brackets in. Another option is JSport does have a 69-inch wide suspension as well. So I currently have the L&W high clearance on the front and L&W high clearance on the rear, and it was already powder coated red, which matches up with this suspension nicely. So this suspension came in black. So I definitely like the red touch to it. So probably the most common question I'm going to get is, why am I spending this time and money to swap out the suspension? Okay, so wider is more stable, better for handling, harder to tip over, roll over, more suspension travel. Okay, so the disadvantage is if you have narrow trails, then you don't want a wider suspension. Also, the R turning radius sucks, to be honest. So that's the disadvantage in doing this. But the suspension travel is greater. So I also have a Fox IQS system, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. It does have a lifetime warranty. And if you're not familiar with it, there's a rocker switch in the cab, and I can switch from my suspension settings from soft, medium to firm. Highly recommend that. So I put about 100 miles on it just to get a feel with it, with the factory suspension, just to see what it was going to be like after I swapped it out. Now that I have my suspension on there, but keep in mind I have the shock therapy, the spring kit. I have the Fox IQS. I have my shocks revalved, and the handling, the cornering, it's a huge difference. For only 5 inches wider, it makes a huge difference. But that's also why eventually I want to go with the 77-inch suspension. So hopefully if you have a four-seater and you want to make it wider, this video will help you. Again, if you have any questions, I try to get back to you as soon as possible on YouTube. So you can also look me up on Facebook. I will be under Honda Talon Turbo Russell on there. So this kit I bought from JSport. I mean, it's absolutely goes in there perfectly. I mean, the quality, I mean, the angles that's cut at, just absolutely fits in there perfectly. Every single cut on here is really custom. And just to show you what it looks like before welded in and painted. I mean, it goes together very, very well. I basically got all the paint off the frame to all the areas I was going to locate, or all the areas I was going to weld. Just got all the paint off the frame, welded it in there, and then painted it back up, as you can see. But this is the kit from JSport. And of course, dealing with Adam Gunn is going to be about the best customer service you find in the business. All right, so here's the passenger side of the X4. And you'll see the bracket is missing right here. I'll show you the other side that I've completed where I welded it in, but you'll see the plastic is already molded to go around that bracket to mount the upper rear arm on it. So you can see the X actually bolts further up right there for the trailing arm. The R will actually use this location for the bolt. Okay, you also will need new brake lines. So basically I disconnected right here, undid the brake line and then undid the 10mm bolt to get the X suspension off, because on the R, I'll show you, actually the brake line runs along the top arm on it. All right, so right there is about where that crossbar goes. That plastic already is molded to go around it because they use the same plastic piece right here for the R, the X2 and the X4. Okay, and then this piece is going to, hopefully it doesn't fall out of there. At that angle, it's going to go right in there. So it's going to mount up to the bottom of here and to the side of this vertical member. And then the extra plate is going to go on the outside and it will go in there as well. So that's kind of what it looks like before it's welded in. All right, so here's the driver's side on the X4. I welded in the bracket that goes across there. I painted it. So, you know, it's double shear. So there's a bracket on each side. And the X does not have this upper arm right here. And the brake line is routed differently, so it's hooked on there. That's why you need a different brake line. I just hooked it right into that same location. Like I was mentioning before, the R hooks into this back mount, which is already there. The X hooks into that front spot. Okay, so the R has a different spindle or knuckle. So it's missing this section right here. And also the X does not use this bracket, but is already in place. So you basically need the R knuckle. That bracket's already there, and weld in that bracket. You're good to go to swap over suspensions. So let me just show you the other side. So here's still the X knuckle. As you can see, that bracket was never used, but it's in place. And then it's missing the extra hook up there for the upper arm that the R uses. So it's really a pretty easy process. You can use the same rear differential, same mounting spots. So this is just kind of what it looks like. R suspension here. That's L&W high clearance on there. That's a factory trailing arm. And then it's also a factory upper arm that goes on there. And then here's the X suspension. All right, so this is what everything looks like, just tack welded in. So I have all the frame cleaned off. Nice little tack weld on there. As you can see, I just kind of popped that back in to make sure it's in the right place, but that molded plastic goes around there, tack weld there. Little tack weld down there as well. So that's kind of what it looks like. So basically, put those pieces in place, put this upper arm into place to make sure everything lines up, which it lines up perfectly. So I highly, highly recommend this kit from JSport if this is what you want to do. So now I'll just weld it up, paint it, and it'll be good to go. So one other thing to keep in mind is the sway bar. So this is the factory X4 sway bar. If you're swapping over an R, the sway bar thickness is a little bit different, so you would have to take the brackets as well, not just the sway bar. Okay. The X4 sway bar is 22.2 millimeters, so it's a little thicker. The X2 and the R are 22 even. So I have a Ibach aftermarket adjustable sway bar. So I have 3 different slots there. that I'm going to put on here. All right, so how I removed the A-arms on here was I removed the 4 A-arm bolts, okay? I left the knuckle completely assembled. So like once the top A-arm was loose, of course after, you know, removing the shock first, then I could kind of flip that over, slide the axle out, and then I just left the A-arms connected to the knuckle, so I didn't have to remove either of those ball joints. The only thing I took off of the knuckle was the tie rod, okay? So that worked out pretty nicely because these ball joints kind of come out pretty violent, so I just left them in. All right, so we have the front end almost completely removed. So you basically just start up here, unhook your brake line, and then there's an 8mm bolt holding that in. And then you have your 4 A-arm bolts, pull that out. The next step is removing the 3 bolts that hold your front differential in. And then the 3 bolts that hold the clutch to the front differential, you remove that. Slide that front differential forward. And then we're going to remove the steering rack, swap out the steering rack. And there's 4 bolts on top of that. So I'm gonna cover all this up so dirt don't get in there when I'm removing the steering rack. But this is what it looks like. So everything swaps over perfectly easy on the front end.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.